We sat down with former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta just hours before President-elect Trump announced that retired Marine General James Mattis was his pick to head the Pentagon. In order for Mattis to serve, Congress must change a law that states military officials must be out of the service for 7 years prior to taking control of the Pentagon. Mattis, who headed up Central Command, retired 3.5 years ago.
Explain for people why the civilian control of the military is a tradition, and why having a general is a good or a bad thing, or just what kinds of things people should be thinking about.
Well, it goes back to George Washington. There's a great portrait up at the Capitol of George Washington giving up his commission in the military in order to become President of the United States, which I think was a reflection of the fact that it's important to have civilian leadership and civilian perspective when it comes to those issues. Doesn't mean that you can't have a military background. I think that that is important to have that background. But at the same time, in those jobs, you've got to exercise the ability to understand political issues, to deal with broader issues that involve your capability to relate to the American people. And so, yes, having a strong defense background is important, but it's also important to be able to have that ability to understand the civilian side of that job, because both are involved as Secretary of Defense.
You've worked with James Mattis. What do you think about him?
I like Jim Mattis a lot. He's a tough general, spoke the truth, was a good advisor. I trusted his defense judgment. And so I think he's got a lot of qualities that are important to a Secretary of Defense job. I do think that it's important for Congress to talk with him if he is nominated, to make sure that he also understands this civilian perspective, because I think it's important to have that when you become Secretary.
We'll have a lot more of our interview with former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta when we come back. Welcome back to Face the Nation. I'm John Dickerson. We continue our interview with former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta. We pick up with my asking him what he makes of Donald Trump.
John, I think, like a lot of people, I'm still trying to figure him out and try to figure out just exactly who we're going to have as the new president. He's very unconventional, and you're just not quite sure which Donald Trump is going to walk into the Oval Office, whether it's the reality TV tweeting president, or whether it's the business president who will be serious-minded about approaching it. So it's really difficult right now to try to get a sense of just exactly what the president-elect is going to be like.
And what do you make of some of the picks that he's made for top positions? Do they give you any sense of what his administration might look like?
Well, in many ways, it reflects some of the positions, obviously, he took during the campaign. But at the same time, obviously, he's talking to a lot of people. And I suspect he is probably for the first time getting a real sense of what the awesome responsibility of president is all about. And it just seems to me that in light of that, he's beginning to talk to a number of people that will bring some experience and some perspective that I think he's going to need if he's going to be able to deal with the multitude of crises he's going to be confronting.
One of the things I heard over and over again during the campaign is voters would say he doesn't have Washington experience, but he'll be able to surround himself with advisors.
That's not good enough. The reality is, it is the President of the United States who has to make the final decision. And you can have a lot of bright people. They can present you a lot of options. But unless you've taken the time as president to understand those issues, to read into those issues, to understand the consequences of those issues, you cannot just rely on others to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. You've got to make the decision.
So far, Donald Trump has picked a lot of people who are already on his team. They call them loyalists inside the Trump campaign. What does that suggest to you in terms of this quality that people talk about with presidents, somebody needing to be able to go in there and tell them no? How important is that quality?
Well, there's no question that loyalty is important, but if you're going to be, a top staff assistant to the President of the United States, you've got to be willing to tell him the truth. You've got to be willing to tell him when you think he's wrong and when he's taking the wrong step. I mean, the biggest problem in the White House that I've experienced is that everybody's trying to figure out what the president wants to hear and then tell the president what he wants to hear. And I suspect that, a big personality like Donald Trump, probably intimidates a lot of people who don't necessarily want to look him in the eye and tell him exactly what he may not want to hear. But I always felt my responsibility as chief of staff was to be the person who walked into the Oval Office and said to the president, you can't do that, or this is wrong, and be able to tell him what you believe is the truth. And if you don't have that, that I think starts a president off on the wrong foot.
Speaking of Congress and confirmations, what question should members of Congress ask the director about taking over the CIA now?
I think the most important question is to ask whether or not you are willing to provide the most accurate and credible intelligence to the President of the United States, whether he wants to hear it or not. The role of a CIA director is to provide that kind of credible intelligence. That's the whole purpose of providing the so-called presidential daily brief. It's to inform the president of what's taking place in the world. What do we know about the world? What do we know about crises? What do we know about those that are trying to in some way threaten this country? Frankly, one of the concerns I have right now is that this president is not getting his intelligence briefings. He's taken a few of them, but he's not getting them every day. If you're president of the United States, you better be in touch on a daily basis with your intelligence briefers so that you have an understanding as to what's happening in the world, what are the crises you have to pay attention to, and what steps do you have to take in order to deal with those crises.
Explain for people why a president couldn't check in with his intelligence briefers every once in a while. It didn't need it every day.
It doesn't work that way. You are constantly on the intelligence scale looking at a series of threats that may be out there. Some of them may be credible, some may not be credible. But those threats change on a day-to-day basis with new intelligence, with new sources, with new assets that provide information. Every president I know, and I've worked under 9 presidents, every one has taken their intelligence daily brief because that sets the agenda for what you have to focus on as President of the United States.
The only job you haven't held, it seems, would be Secretary of State, but Donald Trump is looking at a Secretary of State. If you were giving him advice, given all that you know, the 9 presidents you served, people have been discussed, or General Petraeus, Mitt Romney, Rudy Giuliani, assess that field in terms of what you know from your inside experience a Secretary of State has to do.
For this president in particular, but it's probably true for every president, no matter how experienced they may be, you want to have a Secretary of State that understands the world, understands the issues that are out there, has the ability to relate to other world leaders, has the ability to be able to implement diplomacy, to engage with others, but most importantly, has the ability to understand how do you, on a diplomatic basis, approach the crises that a president of the United States has to deal with. You need to have a strong Secretary of State because that person is your ambassador to the world. And without that, you are left without the information and without the ability to make the right decisions that have to be made in a complicated world. We're dealing with a world that's very dangerous right now. Got a lot of flashpoints in this world. You need to have a Secretary of State that understands those flashpoints and understands how to deal with our adversaries, but also how to deal with our allies.
Do you think one of those fits that criteria?
My sense is that, I know he's talking to Mitt Romney. I think Romney would be able to fit that. I think there are others he's talking to that obviously would be able to accomplish that as well. But I think the president needs to understand that if he's going to implement a strong foreign policy, if he's going to take care of our national security, a strong Secretary of State is absolutely essential to your ability to protect this country and to advance our interests in the world.
Leon Panetta, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.